Okay, I'd like to start today and talk about certain things about God that we really don't notice and we really don't think about. But there are certain truths that are very important that are about God and so on and so forth. And there's certain truths about Him which is it's important to really to understand. First of all, the first thing we have to ask is fundamentally, who are we? What is a human being, and so on. And the question is, when we refer to myself, me, what is that exactly? What is the me? Where is it located? And so on. So we want to understand is who exactly is the sense of me that we say. Where is that located? So therefore, if I'm talking to a specific person and I say to him, where is the you? That person who you refer to as me, where is he located? Is he the clothes that you are wearing? Or rather, is he in the clothes that you are wearing? So the person answers me, no, I am not my clothes. I said, okay, so then who is this person? So therefore, if it's not your clothes, take the clothes off. So the person then will take his clothes off. And then I look at the person and I say, well, is what's left you. And of course, what's left after he takes his clothes off is his body. And he says, are you the person who is the body? Is that where the me is located? So then the person says, no, that is not me. That is not where the me of myself is located. So then you say to him, okay, in that sense, could you please take that thing off? So you therefore what you do is you step out of your body. So then you look at the person and you say, is this the me? And when the person steps out of his body, what you see is his soul. So you're now looking at the soul of the person and you're saying to him, is this you? The soul. So then so he answers you, no, this is not me. No, I am not my clothes, I am not my body, and I am not also my soul. All of this does not refer to the me. So I say to him, so who is the me? Who is that person who you call myself? So then he says to you, me, when I call myself, is actually a self, S-E-L-F. And this self is really where the me is located. So what does that mean? What does that mean that the actual me that you refer to as when you say myself is actually an entity called self? What exactly does that mean? That means fundamentally that all the things which are covered in the self are really like a costume. So in other words, the self is really located in a costume. The self is located in the first level of costume, which is called the soul. And then on top of that soul is another costume, which is called the body. And then finally on the third level of the costume, you are in a suit of clothes. So therefore you have three costumes that cover the actual part of you, which refers to as me. And what do we see? We see that we are really never truly in touch with the self. We are never truly in touch with that item, which is exclusively that me that I refer to as myself. At that point, I then begin to analyze. So therefore, if you are a sense of self, and that's all you are, then everything that about you, what I see, is only a costume which covers that sense of self. So the question is, what can that self do? What is it capable of doing? And then I say, can that self think? Could it think? So you say, yes, the self can think. But fundamentally, what is the self? It's fundamentally an organ which is self-aware. And that's all it really can do. The self is nothing more than an organ with the capacity for self-awareness. So then I ask it, well, could you do anything? Could you perform? Can you execute anything that you want to do? For example, when what I see you, when you are in your body, and the body is what covers you, can that body actually do anything? And then I think about it, I say, well, it doesn't appear that I really can do anything. For example, it doesn't appear like I can perform any real actions. Because, for example, when suddenly I stand up, and I will that my body should suddenly perform the ability to stand up. What does that mean? It means I simply have a will, I have an intent. And with this intent that I have, suddenly the muscles in my body contract in my legs and have the ability to stand up. But how I do that, I don't know. You know, even though my body can do things, I can stand up, I can move my arms, I can move my legs, I can move different parts of my body, I can do things with my body. But the fact is that when I really think of it, I don't really know how I do things. I just know that these things get done. My connection to any action that I do is really only a manifestation of a will. I want to do it. So suddenly, the action gets done through my muscles or my organs. The question is, what is the connection between my will and between my muscles, for example? If I want to stand up, so therefore I have to initiate movement in millions of muscle cells that have to coordinate in a certain way. They contract. Millions of muscle cells have to contract at the same time in my legs so that I'm suddenly able to stand up. And how I relate to those muscles is simply through my will. In other words, I can feel myself having a volition, having a want. And this volition has the ability to contract all those muscle cells, millions of muscle cells, in a coordinated manner, where they all suddenly contract in the same direction, and they're able to take my legs and push me up so that I can be standing. But exactly how that is done, how does my muscles actually do that? How do I literally, with my will, contract millions of muscle cells that suddenly make me stand up? I don't know. And the same thing with any kind of action that I do with my body. There are many actions that I can do with my body that are automatic. From an autonomic nervous system For example, I can swallow something and then digest my food. But how I do that, I have no idea. So when I put something in my mouth, suddenly an automatic process takes over. And suddenly my esophagus takes the object which is in my mouth and starts to move and pushes the food downward into my stomach. But even though I do this, I have no idea how I execute this function. So in other words, when I really think of all the activities that my body can do, whether these activities are automatic, and my body does them, like moving my esophagus, moving my stomach in a certain way, putting in certain stomach acids, digesting the food, or my body is moving my heart so that my heart is beating and beating with blood all around my body. These are actions that I do. Yes, it is me because it is done by my body with the muscles and all the cells in my body. But how it works, how my body knows exactly what to do in each instance, I have no idea. So all of these actions are really automatic. And even those actions which are voluntary, where I just move my muscles and suddenly my muscles work and they allow me to get into different positions, they move my body in a certain way. How do I do that? I don't know. The only thing that I'm related to is the will to do that. And suddenly, my body suddenly then takes over and it's able to exercise. It's able to exercise and do the action. So in other words, when I really think about it, I cannot really execute anything. Even though I have a feeling that somehow my body is doing things with the automatic processes, like my heartbeats, or voluntary processes, like I move. My muscles perform all these functions without any of my knowledge and so on. So I can only perform the event of execution only from a distance. But in actuality, this event called execution cannot be done at all in a direct way with my will. So when I really think about it, I cannot execute any action at all with my body. So then the question is, so if I can't directly do anything with my body, the real question is, how does my body work? Who is doing all these actions with my body that result in a certain kind of result, a certain kind of action? How am I able to move my body in all directions and in all sequences? How am I able to do all of that? The answer is, am I really doing that? And the answer is obviously is no. So therefore, who is the motor, is causing the motion of all my bodily functions and all my bodily efforts? Who causes that? If the only way that I'm aware of that is through my will. And of course, the answer to that is God. God is the one who is actually moving every muscle in your body and every cell in your body so that it follows the prescribed pattern. And suddenly you are able to do everything with your body. So if God is the only one who's able to execute an action, any action from my body, what am I able to do? What is the relationship that I have to all my costumes, my body, my soul, my clothes? What relationship do I have to all of it so that I can do any kind of action? And the answer is, obviously, I have no relationship to it. All these actions occur kind of automatically. So that's when we first realize that really we can do nothing. When we think that we can do things, when we think we can get things done, the answer is obviously we cannot do anything. Anything which requires some kind of motion in my body, the movement of millions of cells towards any action, cannot be done with myself at all. All of these things are only done through God. So God is the actual mover of every bodily action that I have. So what, therefore, can I really do? It's a very strange thing, really. Because when you ask a person, what can he do really? He says that he believes that I can do anything because I have free will. In other words, I can do something. That's what a person really believes, that all his emotions are coming from himself, that he can do something, and he believes that he has free will, that therefore he can do whatever he wants. And that's why he has free will. So he has two things. He has the ability to move, the ability to act, and that ability to act is free. He can go in any specific direction and do fundamentally almost anything that he wants. So therefore, when he prays to God, he says, God, I need your help. That in other words, I can do the action. I can choose freely to do an action, but I need your help. And this is called in Hebrew, a siyata deshmaya. What we say to God is that all I can do is attempt. I can make the attempt. But you're the one who actually does the action that allows me to succeed. So the only actions that I can do are actions would have to do it with an attempt. That I have an attempt, I can attempt to do it. For example, if I want to go out of a room, I'm inside of a room and I want to go out, so what I can do is I can perform all those actions and go to the door, put my hand on the knob of the door and turn it. So therefore, I can do those actions which will allow me to open the door. But the truth is, whether the door opens or not is not only dependent if I turn the knob. It's also dependent on the door if it's locked. So if the door happens to be locked, even though I turn the knob and I try and get out of the room, I cannot succeed. So therefore, I have a certain relationship with God. The relationship I have with God is that I can do the attempt. I can try and do the action. And I execute all those activities which have to do with the attempt. But whether I succeed or not is up to God. So God fundamentally controls my success. But I control my attempt. But is that true? Well, what we see really is that I don't even control the attempt. when I stand up and I go to the door and I turn the knob, am I doing that? Do I do all those bodily actions and all those motions that actually are responsible for the execution of the attempt itself? And the answer is no. Because all I do is I will my body to move in a certain direction and in a certain place so that I can turn the knob. But who's doing that? Who's moving my body in a certain direction to be able to turn the knob? Am I doing it? Or is God doing it? And the answer is, God is doing this. So in other words, when I think that I am free to make an attempt, and God fundamentally is responsible if my attempt is true so that I can actually succeed, that's false. Because I can't even make an attempt. God is actually making the attempt for me. He's moving my body. He's causing all those motions that make the thing viable and possible. And I actually control nothing. I am aware that it's happening. I am aware that my body is moving in a certain direction and doing certain things. But I can't say that I myself am doing that. I am aware that I'm doing certain things only in the sense that I am aware that I have a will and I want to do certain things. But how I get my body to do all those motions that are required, even to turn the knob, is not done by me. It's like it's done by an automatic robot. It's like my body is a complete robot that functions because I initiate the will to act. But the actual action that my body takes is not me. It's like an automatic machine that responds to my effort and starts to do things. It starts to move. My body awakens and starts to move. But I am not really directly in control of that movement. I am not really in direct control of any specific cell in my body to do any specific act. My body knows how to do the actions, and it does the action from a distance. So my body is therefore really kind of a container. The relationship of my self-awareness to myself in my body is like the relationship that I have with my body, where my body serves as a sort of a container that holds myself and allows me to have a will. But further than that, my will does not go, because my body does all these things by itself. Or actually, God does these things through my body and activates my body to do anything. So therefore, even when I pray to God to allow me to succeed, the truth is, I have to pray to God to allow me to make the attempt. Not only does God have to assist me in succeeding at an effort, but God has to allow me to make the attempt itself, to actually move my body so I can make the attempt to open the door by turning the knob. Because the truth is, in actuality, that who I really am, which is nothing more than a self, is only capable of an awareness. It's not capable of performance. It's not capable of execution on any level. All I can do is manifest a certain will. But I cannot manifest anything that has to do, I can only manifest a will to execute, but I cannot perform with my body any movement or any action that actually can execute an action, whether it's an attempt to do something, the attempt to turn the knob, or whether or not I could succeed, where I can actually execute anything. Everything is controlled by God, both the attempt and the success of an action. Because I fundamentally am only self-awareness. I am a sense of self which is aware and can express a certain will, could want to do things. The only thing that's in my power to execute is the desire to execute, the desire to do something. I can have no control on the action of execution, on the action of performance. So it's as if my sense of self is simply located in a container, which is called the body. And that container, which is called the body, sits in another container called the soul, which is more inner me. So there's an outer me, which is called the body, and then there's an inner me called the soul. But even that, both of these, body and soul, are simply lenses. They simply, each one allows me to see reality in a certain way. But both of these things, the body and the soul, are really containers, which in the end contain the real me, which is what? Which is nothing more than a self. And that real me can do nothing but be aware. To be aware and to involve volition as an act of a will. I can will something, but that's all I can do. And suddenly that will moves my soul, and then my soul moves my body. And then I perform an execution, but the entire act of execution is performed by God. So suddenly I realized an incredible thought, an incredible reality, that I can do nothing. I can do nothing even with free will. I can have a volition, I can have a will, and that's it. And suddenly my body and then my soul execute that action in a way that I have no idea. I am never in charge of the elements of that container. You know, the elements which contain myself. So then there's this perfect machine which does everything that I want it to do, but it does it on its own and by itself. Both my body and my soul are like the instruments of action that are initiated by my awareness. But that's all I'll ever be in charge of, being aware of my will, never being able to execute anything through my body and soul. These things act for me in a certain way, because my self is contained in these objects, which act automatically at the expression of my will. But I myself have nothing to do with the action or the execution of that action. So the ultimate question is, what am I really responsible for? If I can't do an action directly, but an action is only done for me by my containers of a body and soul, but they are not done through me, but for me. So therefore, what exactly am I aware of? And what does it mean that I have free will? That my will is free? And so on. Well, awareness simply means that I'm aware of what? I'm aware of what is around me. And I am aware of what's in me. My sense of self gives me a sense of self-awareness. It simply gives me an awareness that I am. And that I can have a will. And that's it. That's all self-awareness is. It's a statement of my existence, of my manifestation. And that I have an awareness that I am manifest. But in actuality, the act of being is not me. The act of being and executing that being in a certain direction really is done through my body and soul, which are certain instruments of execution done by God. My awareness is manifest suddenly in terms of an action, but that action is completely done by God. The action of my body, the action of my soul, the action is executed for me by some kind of automatic instrument that's beyond me. In other words, and this is very hard to really state, things are done for me and never by me. The only thing that's done by me is that I have a will that I am, and that I can do and that I want to do. But the execution of every action that I do beyond awareness is simply done by instruments that I'm contained in. I'm contained in a body which works for me. I'm contained in a soul which works for me in the spiritual world. But its actual movement, its actual execution is never done by me. So for example, technically speaking, when I'm sitting down and I want to stand up, that ability to stand up is not in my control. Because this is done by God. My ability to stand up from a chair, which is done through my body, is not done by me. It's controlled by God. So I can only stand up if God wants me to. So therefore, even if I want to do a mitzvah, that does not mean I will do it. I will simply manifest the desire to do a mitzvah. But I am never responsible for the action of doing a mitzvah. The action of doing a mitzvah on any level, which is done through my body and soul, is completely controlled by God. So the only statement that my sense of self can say is that I want to do. I want something to be done. And God will have to follow through on that in total. To allow my body to move and act in a certain way, and to allow my soul to move and act in a certain way, in the way that it acts. So in actuality, I am not responsible for any action that's performed consistent with my will. All I'm responsible is that I have a will, that I can decide, I can want something. But I cannot contribute to the actual execution of the action by my body or my soul at all. God is the fundamental agent who's responsible for every bit of an action that's associated with my will, and that's all. So in the end, I am completely dependent on God to make any action whatsoever. And be honest with you, this insight that I can do nothing but have a will to do something, and God can do everything to see to it that an action is performed so that my body and my soul do actions of what I want. That my ability to do anything doesn't exist. In other words, I do not have the power to do at all in any sense. I only have the power to be aware. That's all. And to want to do. But I do not have the power to do at all in any sense. But things are done for me. God controls the mechanism of execution, the mechanism of an action completely. I just control the content of my awareness and the content of my will. But I have nothing to do in actuality with the ability to do or to act. So what it is I can do then? What is the one power that I have if I don't have the power to do anything, but I am contained in a container system which contains my sense of self? First it's contained in my soul, and then my sense of self is contained in my body. And these are automatic instruments which allow execution. The action is initiated by my will, but the performance of the action is done through these containers, to myself and to my body. So what is it that I finally can control? What level of execution do I have at all? And the answer is, all I am in charge of is simply the execution of who I am. I can execute an awareness that I am myself. But even that's subject to choice, because my awareness is subject to two possibilities. In reference to God, I can be aware of me, you. I call myself me, and I refer to God as you. So my awareness, therefore, can choose the direction of a perception. The perception that the awareness of God is really a dual awareness, that I am aware of myself and that I am aware of Him. Myself I call me, and He I call you. So my awareness takes the form of a me-you relationship. Or I can choose to have a different perception, that God is not really a you. He is not outside of Him, but rather I am inside of God in a certain way. That when we say Einoi Movadoi, that's what I actually mean. That in no way, shape, or form am I truly outside of God. That in a certain way, I am a result of His will. In some way, His will of Himself somehow forms the ability to have an awareness of myself. So therefore, the feeling that I have from Him, from Himself, is the concept of myself. So therefore, my self, my awareness of self, comes from His awareness of self. But how does He do that? How does He produce my sense of me? Well, in a certain way, what He does, and I can have no idea of how He does it, but in a certain sense, it's like we take a word. Let's say you take a word, the word sane. And if I write that word down on a piece of paper, that word will be spelled in a certain way. It will be spelled S-A-N-E. Those are the 4 letters that comprise the sounds of the word sane. Now, what happens if I change those letters around into the words N-E-A-S? So I take the same letters and I change their order relative to themselves, and I make a new word, the word N-E-A-S, niece. So what really I have done, I have taken the sounds of the word sane and I have changed the sounds in their sequence. So now I have a different word, N-E-A-S, niece. But the letters are the same. The only difference is the order in which the letters appear. So that ability to change a sound into a different sequence and therefore form another word, what I've really done is I've taken the same sounds that comprise one word, sane, and I've taken the same letters that comprise it, S-A-N-E, changed the sequence of those letters so that the word has a different sound, a niece. So therefore what I've done is I've changed the elements, the sound elements contained in a word into a different word, but the sound elements remain the same. So I've changed the sequence of the sound elements of a word, but I have not changed the sound elements. That I use as a mashal, as an example of how his will produces my will. That in some way I am a different manifestation of his will. And therefore suddenly I exist with a sense that I am myself. In other words, God is the word S-A-N-E, sane. Those are the sounds that produce a word that describes them. Now I could change the sequence of those letters and make a different word, N-E-A-S. But fundamentally, the sounds of the word are exactly the same as the sounds of his words. And that in a certain way is a conversion from his will to my will. That in certain ways, he's able to manifest his will according to a different sound arrangement. And suddenly that new sound arrangement of the sounds themselves, or the order of those sounds, sounds different. So in that difference, I see myself. I have a sense of self. So therefore, I come from his will. My will comes from his will. But in a certain way, my will and his will are different sound arrangements, different sound sequences. So in one sequence, his sound represents himself. In another sequence of sounds, they represent me. So they both come from the world of will. And therefore, I come from his will in a different arrangement, and this produces my will, me. So therefore, God is not a me-you relationship. There is no real difference in a certain sense, because I come from the same sound arrangements which he has. He turns that sound arrangement around, so suddenly I have a different will in a different direction, and I have a different concept of myself. He is represented by the letters A-S-N-E, sane, and I am represented by the letters N-E-A-S, which is simply a different arrangement of the same letters. So therefore, in a certain sense, I come from the substance which is God. but in a completely different way. So I have a sense completely of myself as opposed to him. But that's a mistake. It's a mistake that I assume that I don't come from him, that I am a separate person with my own sense of self-awareness. But the truth is I come from him, but in a completely different sequence. So it feels like to me that I am a different being. I am a person with a different sense of self. My existence is completely different than his, but it's not. It's some kind of rearrangement of him in a different way completely. And his nature, his qualities, the nature is completely different than me. But that difference is due to a different sequence and sounds. It's not due to different sounds entirely. So therefore I realize that I am part of God. I'm just somewhat a different arrangement. And my will is different. My sense of me is somewhat different. But it all comes from his sense of himself. So therefore, rather than perceiving him as a me-you relationship, I really see that I am part of him. And that's what he wants me to see. What exactly is free will? Free will is not my ability to do anything that I want to do, which is outside of his will, because I see that I can't do anything. I have no ability to execute any action whatsoever. The only thing I can do is rearrange my awareness in a different way. The parameters which cause his awareness are the same parameters which cause my awareness, but in a completely different arrangement. So therefore, I realized, Einoid, there is nothing but him, because he is the essence of the letters. He is the essence of sounds. He's the only one that is a representation of a word, the sounds of a word. He is the sounds of words. It's his will, which is the dominant feature of the sounds of words, the letters. The letters will make up the sounds of words are him. That is him. And I am simply a different sequence of those letters. And so therefore it appears that I am a different person completely. And therefore I think of the duality of me and you. But in actuality, there's no me, you. There's simply me. You're different. You'll have to control your the possibility of the sounds. Somebody's letting your sounds come into the tape. So therefore, I am part of them. So therefore, we do not relate in our awarenesses between a me-you relationship, me being myself and you being God, but me, inner me. My sense of awareness comes from his sense of his awareness. But whereas I am simply a sequence of certain letters, he is the letters himself. That is the difference. He is not a sequence of those letters, whatever letters I choose to represent them, but he is the very letters itself that comprise all words. He is the manifestation of a will, period. And I am the manifestation of a certain type of will, which is me. So therefore, my relationship with God is us. We are an us. Him and me are not a him and me in a duality in a way. Him and me are simply an us, where he is the letters themselves, the sounds of the words, and I am a certain sequence or arrangement of those letters. And that's the only thing that I can do. The only thing I can do really in terms of execution is to execute my awareness. What is my awareness? Is my awareness simply that I am a me and he's a you? Or not? No, it isn't. It's simply an awareness that my will, my sense of myself, only comes from him. And therefore I am a piece of him. And therefore my relationship with God is as an us. But that's the only domain in which I have free choice at all, to understand what my relationship is with God. That's the only activity that I really possess. My perception of who he is in terms of what I am. So this is the only thing that I'm afraid of, that I have. So the only freedom that I have is not the freedom to do anything, because I cannot do anything. Everything is done for me through my body and soul, which are the instruments of action. But the only thing I'm aware of is my awareness itself, of our relationship between him and me. Are we a dual being? Are we two separate beings, where I am a me and he's a you? Or are we really one being, where I am part of his sense of himself? But he is more than simply a sequence of these letters. He is the actual sound of the letters themselves, which is the actual manifestation of being. And therefore I am simply a type of being. So God is being itself, is the being of itself as it is, as it exists, as it's manifest. And I am an example of a certain form of what his will suddenly makes me through a sequence of sounds. But the actual sound is God. So in this sense, I am free. And when God put me in the universe, the physical universe, he's saying to me, your job is simply to get a correct perception, because you have the possibility of making a mistake, between who I am and who you are. So therefore, your sense of self gives you the false belief that you're outside of me, and I want you to change that. I want to rearrange your awareness of who you are and who I am. And for that, I give you free will. I allow your will or your awareness to make a mistake. Instead of realizing that we really are an us, that you come from me, you will think that you don't come from me, that even if you come from me, but you have a sense of freedom from me. You are outside of me, and I'm outside of you. And in that state, you are now free. But the truth is, you have no freedom whatsoever. You have simply a freedom to make a mistake of who we are together, me and you, and that we are really a being called us. And you have the ability to make a mistake or not make a mistake. So everything that I've created, it simply gives you a freedom to make a mistake. But it also gives you the freedom to be aware that it's a mistake and to change the way you see me. So the only thing you can do is be aware. And that's where all the actions that are possible for you, your ability to execute, lies only in your ability to change what you think about me. Because all you are is self-awareness. Everything about you is a costume. Your souls are costumes. Your body is a costume, which your sense of self inhabits. You have no freedom to control the costume that you're wearing. Your only freedom lies in your awareness, what you are aware of. Are we two separate beings? Well, you're outside of me. So therefore we are me, you. Or we're really one being where you are part of me. And I created you. And therefore you still are completely codependent on me. You're completely dependent for your sense of me from my sense of me. And you can never be independent because you are never the letters themselves. You are not the sounds of existence. Your sense of yourself is not the sounds, but it's the sequence of the sounds. And that's what gives you your independence, why you think you're outside of me. But in actuality, you're not outside of me. Because you are composed of my letters that are me. The sounds which make me, for example, are the sounds that make you. Except those sounds now exist in a different sequence of letters. So you're never truly outside. So therefore, you and me are simply examples of an us. I am the letters, I am the sounds, and you are a sequence of those sounds in a certain way. So even though your word, the word that represents you, is different than the word that represents me, there are no words that represent me. I am represented not by a word, by a certain sequence of sounds, but by the sounds themselves. And that's the difference between you and me, God says. I am the sounds of the letter. I am the sounds that make all selves. And all these selves are simply different sequences of those sounds. But they are not different letters. So I am the letters that represent the sounds. You are the sequence of those letters, and the sound that it produces is your sense of self. But that forever will be us. And then also, it will forever define what you can do. It will forever define your ability to execute and not execute. Because all you can execute is not an action. You have no control to execute actions, either physically or even spiritually. They are all performed by me, by manipulating your containers of body and soul. You can only control your sense of awareness. And that leaves you two choices. The mistaken choice, that you're outside of me and you're independent of me, because we're both a me and a you, a dual being, or the correct view, that you're part of me. And you can never be independent of me. And that's all you can do, because all you are is an active awareness. So now that we have an understanding of what free will is, that you can either choose to maintain the mistake or not. And that's all you're really capable of executing. The awareness of who you are and who I am. Now we have to look at and see, what is the awareness of God? What can God do? What can He execute? So when we really begin to look at what He can execute, we are simply astonished. Because the universe is really nothing more than a series of events. The existence of the entire universe is manifest through events. These are events that take place in the whole structure of the universe. The universe is composed of stars, which are grouped in terms of galaxies. And astronomers estimate that there are trillions and trillions of stars inside billions and billions of galaxies. Each star is separate from another. But the combination of all the stars in the universe throughout all the galaxies is enormous. And God is in control of all the events of the physical universe and all the events in the spiritual universe. He is in absolute control of every event, every macro event and every micro event that occurs to every entity, star entity or galaxy entity in the universe. And he executes these events, which are his actions. God is also in control of every living thing, whether it's a plant or an animal or humans. He's in actual control of every living entity in the form of life, and the events in the life of that entity. He's in control of what? And not only creating every entity. For example, he is in absolute control of every entity, living entity, like an ant. God is in control of every ant in the universe, every ant on the planet Earth, everyone. And he gives every entity, a living entity, a body, which it actually moves. And he performs the emotions of every entity, insects, mammals, reptiles, whatever it is. Every living entity, specific entity, is controlled intimately by God, the one who controls the movements of an alligator. Every motion that an alligator makes, every way it's manifest, and who controls the way it eats, the way it moves, and so on, is done by God, is not done by the animal. Just like a human being does not execute any event of his body by himself. God does it all through the body. God does that through the body of all animals and plants, every single one. So God is in control of the execution of the actions that's taken by every entity in existence. The billions of separate species of insects, of mammals, reptiles, and so on and so forth. God's in charge of the body of every human being and all the actions that that body may take. So what do we mean by control? We mean by the ability to execute any action, physical action, or the ability to execute any spiritual action. All actions and executions are done by God. Living things have no ability to do anything. The power to do does not exist by any living entity. And even an entity like a human being who has self-awareness, he has absolutely no power to do anything. He simply has the power to be self-aware and to correct the mistakes in his awareness, but nothing else. So we see this enormous power that God has. Whereas humans believe that in certain ways they can execute, we see the truth, that you can do nothing, literally nothing, nothing physical, nothing spiritual. You are nothing more than an action of self to its process of awareness. And since that is all you are, that's all you can do. You have nothing to do with execution. And that applies to every living thing. Every living thing has no ability to do anything. It is done for him by his body. But there's even more than that. for example, a landscape where you see mountains and fields and forests. God is in charge of every landscape, the content of every landscape. So when we look at a forest, we see trees, and we see different types of trees and different arrangement of trees. So let's say in a certain forest, in a certain space, there's an oak tree in front of a pine tree. That's what we see. And we say to ourselves, why is this tree in front of this tree in the forest? What determines the position of every tree in the forest? And the answer is God, who creates everything. But on what basis does he control the location of every particular tree in the forest? What determines that? So the answer is, it all has meaning, because it all has design. Everything has a design to it, and we never think of that. We see that there's a design to every living thing in the world that exists in a certain place, at a certain time, in a certain way. But is there a reason for this? Yes. There's a meaning for this. In other words, even in inanimate objects, let's say stones, when you look at a certain mountain, for example, you see the mountain is composed of different stones, but there are different stones placed in different positions. Well, how does that come to be? How do you have different stones that comprise a mountain? Why is this stone in front of that stone? Why does this landscape have these mountains and that landscape has another set of mountains with a different arrangement? It's a different landscape. What's responsible for every landscape on earth? That it looks different. It's composed of different elements, different forests, different land, different ratio of water to sand, and so on. What determines the formation of every landscape on earth? A certain design. So therefore, the important thing to understand is that what? We, as a universe, galaxies, stars, inanimate objects, animate objects, everything which comprises the universe comes from non-existence. In other words, for example, a human being. There was a time that a human being did not exist. So he was in a state of non-existence. And who gave him existence? Who allowed him to exist? Well, his creator, God. But when God brings a human being from non-existence into existence, is that random? Does that mean suddenly he exists? No, it's not. This human being exists because of a certain reason. God's intent is for this human being to do something specific. So therefore, this human being's existence comes for a certain purpose. Everything which comes from non-existence into existence comes into existence because of a certain purpose, a certain reason. So therefore, existence occurs to non-existence automatically through the concept of design. There's a specific design that's behind the motion of non-existence to existence. Existence appears as a reality to something which did not exist before. Why? Because of certain purpose. And that purpose is manifest through a certain design. That is the fundamental formula of existence. That all existence, every entity in existence, whether living or not, whether it's a star or galaxy or planet, whether it's an entity of life, whether it's a plant or an animal or a species of animal. Everything that came into existence came from the place called non-existence. But as it comes to non-existence, it comes into the world of existence for a specific purpose. The concept of purpose applies to everything that was created, every entity in our complete universe is there because of a certain purpose. And that purpose represents itself as a design. So the concept of design, which indicates intelligence, applies to everything that was made in the universe. There is nothing that exists that was not brought into existence from non-existence outside of a purpose. And that purpose is said to be its design, the way that it exists, the location of its existence in time and space. So therefore, when we say, who made all of this? What we know is that the one who made all of this made it from a certain formula called non-existence to be existence. Existence comes from non-existence, which is a prior state, that something does not exist, and then it comes into existence. Why does it come into existence? Why does this specific inanimate object, like a star, why are there two stars? What's the purpose of each one? What is the design of each one, which is fundamental, the reason why it exists? So therefore, existence itself is governed by design, by purpose. That is included in the process of existence itself. So when people want to know who made everything in the universe, they simply have to realize that everything in the universe comes from a certain design for a certain purpose, or else it wouldn't be. The reason why it exists is because of a certain reason. And that's why it exists in that way. Its existence is fundamentally through qualities that are part of the thing. And that's the design of thing. So the process of existence comes from the process of a non-existence, but through the parameter called design, purpose. And there's a purpose to everything. What that is, we don't know. But there's a purpose to everything. And everything has a singular purpose, so that it's like one vast ecosystem. When we think of the existence of certain species of animals, which is different than the existence of a species of animals, we think that the two are separate, but they're not. Everything in the universe exists because of its purpose, and it was designed that way. And what we see is a complete ecosystem where everything is related. So therefore, the entire universe and everything, every entity in it is an organ in an organism. That's right. Even a human being is part of the organism called entities, the entities of reality. He is part of the same organism that comprised landscapes and trees and all living things. He's part of the landscape of inanimate objects, all the landscapes on earth, mountains and valleys, oceans, and so on. And that's all part of the landscape called the solar system. And that's part of the landscape called the galaxy, the Milky Way, and part of the landscape called all the galactic structures in the entire universe. We see things as separate, and we say, well, each of these things which are separate, but we forget that all of these things came from a state of non-existence where nothing existed. And for each thing to come into existence, it came into existence dominated by a specific purpose. Things just don't happen by themselves. They happen to the master of execution, the master of action, which is God. And they all come into the universe because of a purpose that they share, all of them. Whether you realize it or not, everything which is created in the universe Everything, whether it's an entity, a living entity, an inanimate energy, has the same quality, that it's all the reality of an entity that comes from non-existence to a state of existence. And the only way that you can get into existence is by having a certain purpose in that existence. And the existence of everything together is an organism. It somehow submits to everything. So we see the unity of the universe, the tremendous macro system, which is the organism of all reality. All reality itself is part of an organism. And every member of that organism came into being the same way. They were all in a state of non-existence, and they all came into a state of existence. And that entry into the world of existence is an entry which is only accomplished through the fact that it has a purpose. And that purpose is interconnected to every entity, every action, everything in the universe. It's all part of one singular purpose. What that is, we don't know. But we do know one thing, the unity of every entity in creation. It's like the universe itself is one vast organism. That's what it is, where every entity in that universe, whether it's a galaxy or whether it's an ant, is part of the same system called existence. Existence is a certain state. It's preceded by non-existence. And to go into existence, it goes into a new state. But it has to go into the new state only because of its purpose. Its purpose as part of a whole system. The entire universe and every entity in the universe is part of a vast ecosystem. It's part of a vast organism, governed by the concept of purpose, which is executed by the process of design. And behind it all is God, the only one who can execute, the only one who could do anything. Nothing can do anything. There is no ability to act for any creature or entity. Every action done by an entity is done not by it, but is done for it. It's done for it by its body, by its location. Everything which has to be done, every action which has to be done to an entity is done for it, by its body, or its inner spirit. Man and every entity in the universe besides man cannot do anything at all. He has no ability of execution. And all execution is done to bring one purpose and one reason in the universe. And that captures the design of everything in the universe. That tells you the unity of the Creator, the one who brought everything from non-existence into existence. But not only that, we can even finally go to another dimension, the concept of a mistake. For example, a long time ago, I was in a certain situation where I noticed a piece of paper on the floor, and the piece of paper was crumpled up. So therefore I realized that piece of paper, which lay on the ground in a certain place, was put there by a person. But that, we would call that garbage. That the person thought that he had some kind of use for the paper and discovered that it no longer had a use, so he crumpled it up and threw it on the ground. Now you would say, well, who did that? The person. But no, the person did not do that, because the person cannot perform an action. His mind and his body put that paper where it is now. He performed the execution. That execution of throwing the paper on the floor was done for him, not by him. So therefore, when I say it was done for him, who did it for him? Well, his body did it. His body moved in certain ways that put the piece of paper on the floor. Because a person is not responsible for any of his actions. But why did this piece of paper wind up in that specific place? We don't know. But actually the one who did it was God. God was the one who threw the piece of paper on the floor. Because God is the only one who could do anything. So the question now becomes, why did God put this piece of garbage or piece of paper on the floor at that specific spot? Well, we don't know. But we know that everything which God does, which is the most fundamental thing, everything which exists comes from non-existence. And all things which exist come into existence because of a certain purpose. So therefore, there was a certain purpose of this piece of paper being thrown out at this location on the floor at this space. What that is, we don't know. But even that action, which seems to be a meaningless event of a person crumbling up a piece of paper and throwing it on the floor, you know what I mean? And even that action, which seems to be garbage, having no purpose, is an action which is full of purpose. Why? Because it is done by God. And since God can do everything and does everything for every single thing in the world, it's God's action. And God's action only exists for specific purposes executed by a certain design. So there's a reason why this piece of paper or this piece of garbage was thrown out by this person, or seems to be that he threw it out. And there's a reason why it exists in this location. What that reason is, we don't know. But this is something we have to realize. The absolute quality of every action in the universe. That every action in the universe is done by the only one who can execute any action, any and all actions. Because nothing in the universe does an action by itself. It's incapable. Actions are only performed by God in every sense. Even human beings can only do awareness. They only have self-awareness, ultimately. A person is not his body. He is not his soul. He is simply contained in these items. And these items operate automatically to do everything. So everything in the universe, every action and every entity exists and was designed by God for a certain purpose. Is a vast, huge organism. And what is the purpose of it all? We have no idea. But we could see the tremendous unity of the author of all actions. God is not only the creator of everything, that he brings everything from non-existence into existence. But even after everything is brought into existence, it can only do actions only by God. God not only can create everything, but he also performs all actions that everything does and everything makes. There's nothing that you do, nothing that any living thing does by itself. It is done for it through its body or through its soul, if it's a spiritual being. It is done for it by its containers, which God created for it. God is fundamentally responsible for every action in creation, everything. There is no exception to this, because God is the only one who can act. Because every action is automatic, is done for you, not by you. So therefore, the creation of every entity and the action of every entity is done for it by God at all times. Because God created the possibility of time, the possibility of change. So therefore, we are like entities that coexist in a system that was completely contains us and was designed for us in a certain way. but we have no idea. Every blade of grass sits in the place that it was created for a certain specific reason. One blade of grass is in front of another. Why? We don't know. But it's there for a certain purpose. It comes into existence through that purpose and through that design. So therefore we have a complete different view of God than we have before. God is not only the master of creation that brought everything into existence from a state of non-existence, but God is the only one who does anything, who actually continues to do in time every action. God executes every action done by every entity, whether it's living or inanimate. The entire universe, there is no exception. Why? Because fundamentally God created every entity that exists. That is, he took everything from non-existence to existence. And that transfer from non-existence to existence was for a certain purpose. And that purpose coexisted with the creation of the entity. And that purpose is called design. So God is not only the creator of every design that was ever made, he is also the creator of every entity which submits to those designs by actions, by performances. God is continuously moving the universe and everything in it forward in time, in a certain direction, for a certain purpose. And everything that he created is there for a reason. And the reason is that in some way it's part of the total organism called every entity in reality. We just don't know what that is. We have never seen anything that has such unity. We have never seen anything that has such power. So therefore, what you think when you think that the unity of God is special, you don't even begin to understand and imagine what that unity is. It's a unity which exists in the very fabric of creation, the unity of purpose and the unity of design, that everything came into existence for a specific reason, or else it wouldn't come into existence. And that is completely in control, even over all its actions and everything that's done to it, through it. So God is continuously in charge. Not only is he in charge of its formation, he is in charge of every action that's done in the universe by every single thing continuously. And finally, even the human being, who is simply nothing more than a self, is simply an active awareness. And his job is to choose his perception of his relationship with God. And that's why the whole universe was created, to give man the free will or the ability to choose. Does he rely on his mistake, that he is outside and independent of God? Or does he rely on the truth, that he is simply another sequence of sounds, another manifestation, another order of that sequence? And the final question we have to ask, if God has such control of the creational existence of everything, and of how everything continuously acts, he executes everything that's done. He is the only one that can actually act. Why does he do all of this? And we know one thing, that all of this is done for the purpose of man. Because man is the only one that can choose. Everything cannot choose. Everything is the way it's supposed to be, except man. Man was born with the concept of making a mistake. And God says to him, you can realize that. And once you realize that you're making a mistake of who you are and who I am, I will put you in a place called eternity, which is beyond time and space. And your existence and your awareness will be your total existence forever and ever. So the question that we finally have to ask is, who is man that God not only did all these things for, but created all these things for? Who is man? Obviously, when we look at another human being, we see another human being. Okay, who is this person? Okay, he has a certain name, a certain address, he lives in a certain place, and so on. But does he have any value? No. He's just a living thing that happens to be self-aware. Congratulations. But who is he, man, if man is the ultimate purpose of all existence, and everything was created and exists for man in some way relates to his final purpose? Who is this being called the human being? Well, his value is simply the pasuk. It says, "V'tchatzeyu ma'at me'elokim." How do we know that a person is only a sense of self-awareness? Because Chazal say, the sages say, Hakol b'dei shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven. Chutz miyir shamayim, except for the fear of God. That's right. The sages, one of the famous sayings of the sages, is that everything is in the hands of heaven. Everything. Every being and every action, the performance of every action is done through God. Except one thing that's done by man. And what is that? The fear of heaven. Well, what is the fear of heaven? What's Yir Shemayim? Well, that's what the sages are saying. The fear of heaven is nothing more than an attitude of awareness. That's all he has. So the sages are saying, you think that you can do anything you want. You can't. You think that you can do any action that's in your will. You can't. You can do nothing. Nothing. Every action is something that happens to you, not by you. That's what they're saying. There is nothing at all, either in your creation or in your existence, that you can do at all except be aware. That's all you have. Hakol b'dei shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven. Everything. Chutz miyir shamayim, except for the attitude that all of this is done by God. That's it. The only thing you control is the attitude. And this is the test. This is what God wants you to realize, that you come from Him, that you are a manifestation of His will, and that He has absolute power over every entity in all creation. So therefore, what is a human being? What is he? Why is he so exalted? Because of one reason. He has awareness. You have to realize what awareness means. Awareness means that you know you exist by yourself. Existence is part of your being. The fact that you are the knowledge of your own existence. And this is the greatest thing that God made. Because the singular attribute of God is that God knows that He is by Himself. He has a Himself. God can say me, truly me. That the essence of who I am is the word me. And the only other being that I gave the ability to say the word me is a human being, man. Like the pasuk says in Tehillim, "V'tchatzeyu ma'at me'elokim." Man was created slightly less than God. Well, how is this possible? Because man has one thing that nothing else in the universe. For example, the sun. The sun is a very great thing. It's almost 1 million miles across. Its temperature is 50 million degrees interior-wise on a certain part of it. But the sun is much more powerful than you. A sun is a stellar object. But the sun, could you have a conversation with the sun? Does the sun realize that it is the sun? Does it have consciousness? No. Nothing has consciousness of itself but man. Man has consciousness, which is self-awareness. that comes in himself, for himself, by himself. So therefore, mankind is somewhat little less than God. He has the ability to say, I am, and know that he is. He is the knowledge of himself. Nothing has that knowledge outside of man. And that knowledge is called true consciousness. Consciousness is the ability to be aware of oneself, by oneself. With conscious beings, you can say me and refer to someone who, yourself. Nothing has that ability. Not even animals, because animals only have the ability to know themselves as a part of reality. They are part of an outside. Man can say himself, I am, from the inside. He has a self-awareness that comes from himself. And this is a gift from God. It is a gift of divinity. Man is a semi-divine being, quasi-divine, in the sense that man knows that he is, because that's his consciousness, the consciousness of I am, the consciousness of me. And there's nothing that possesses. So a sun, a stellar object, cannot have a conversation with you. It has no idea that it is the sun. Even though it's vast in size, it is still completely, has no consciousness whatsoever. So who is greater? Who is greater, you or the stellar object called the sun? Well, it's greater than you are in the physical aspects, but you are much greater than the sun. Why? Because you can look at the sun and appreciate its beauty, its breadth, its depth, its size, its power. But it cannot do it by itself. It has no quality which allows it to even know itself. It is inanimate, lifeless. So who is greater, you or the sun? You know, you are, because you have the ability of self-knowledge, and that is the greatest ability of all. You are a subject. The sun is an object. Everything in the universe is really an object. You are the only subject. You are the only one that can say, I am myself. I know that I am automatically. If I close my eyes, I have the full knowledge of my own existence. Where does this knowledge come from? It comes from you. And that's what it means. Man is the only one who is quasi-divine, who has the ability to know that he is, to know that he's manifest. And that knowledge comes from his inner being, from himself, for himself, and by himself. And therefore, in a certain way, that knowledge is what makes man, man. And since man somewhat possesses a divine quality, that's why David HaMelech says in Tehillim, "Vatchasreyu ma'at melekim." He is somewhat less than God, but he has a certain divine quality where he knows that he is. For example, an angel, does an angel know that he is? Yes. But he only knows that he exists as a mission. Every angel represents a mission given to him by God, and his name is his mission. Raphael HaMalach, the angel who heals. He's able to heal, he has a mission, but that's all he is. He knows that his mission and his sense of self is what he does. It's the ability that God gave him. But that's all he knows of himself, his mission. And all he says is, I know my mission, and my name is my mission. Does a human know himself because of his mission? No. He has a true sense of self, a true sense of his own self-knowledge and self-existence. So therefore, the human is the only one who truly exists as himself, for himself, by himself. And in this way, he has certain qualities that are divine. So we therefore see something amazing. We suddenly understand for the first time who God is and who man is. That God is the one who creates everything from non-existence into existence. And it comes into existence by virtue of a certain purpose that it has with respect to the entire organism called all creation. Not only that, while it's in existence, every action that it performs is not done by the thing itself. It's done in its container, by its container, your body, your soul. These are things which contain you, but they are not you. You are nothing more than consciousness, pure consciousness with a sense of self that you are. Nothing else can share that. So God, who created everything as an organism, as one object, as one macroscopic entity, that the whole universe is an organism and exists for a singular purpose. And for certain reasons, that singular person relates to man. And God is in control of creation and in control of all actions. There's nothing that you can do. You do not have the power to do at all. And who did he make this for? For man. But who is man? Man is simply another entity in the world, but he is not another entity. He's a quasi-divine entity that has knowledge of himself. Man is the only entity in the entire universe that can say one word, me. I am, and I am conscious, and that's the way I know that I am. And there is nothing else in all the universe. There's no living or unliving species. There's no object or entity. Everything is an object. Man is the only subject, because man is the only one who can say, me, I am. And it's for this being that God created everything and said to him, I simply want you to know that you are from me and I am your inner me. And by correcting this mistake that you make, that you think I'm a you and you're a me and I'm outside of you, you have to correct that mistake. You have to change the quality of your awareness. And to do this, I will create an entire physical universe, an entire spiritual universe. And I will populate the whole universe with different species and different entities. And I will populate the spiritual universe with different angels. But all of these beings are subservient to man, because man is the only reason why I've created anything, and who has the capability of existing forever beyond time as an object of true self-awareness, which is somewhat similar to my self-awareness. But man is slightly less than God. So the greatest thing that God ever made was the man, was the person. And the greatest gift that he gave him was self-consciousness, the ability to be aware of himself. And everything was created for him. But everything that was created for him in the universe is an object. It has no independence of itself, no independent knowledge of itself. It simply is, it functions. And every way that it functions, that is through God, through the mechanisms which God created for it that perform every action that it undergoes. So we begin to see a different picture of the universe. God not only created everything, but everything was created as an organism, all connected to each other. And that he not only creates everything, he manages and supervises everything. He is the only one that can do execution. He can execute any action. No action can be done outside of God. And the reason why he made all of this is for the human being, for the person who has self-awareness that he knows that he is. Because that's a divine quality. So the two psukim that represent everything that you want to know about God and man are these two psukim. First of all, that what? Hakol b'dei shamayim chutz miyeh shamayim. That everything is in the hands of heaven, which means that everything is done by God. Except one thing. Consciousness. Your consciousness of yourself is the thing which is closest, if you can say that there's anything close, but the only thing that's close to the possibility of being outside of God. Is it outside of God? Of course not. It's a different variation on His will. It's not outside of Him. But if anything was outside of Him, could we consider that, that would be it. That you have the ability to fear Him and to know that He is your enemy. And therefore that's a divine quality. And that's what the sages say. And what David HaMelech says, the other pasuk, man is slightly less than God, which means man is a quasi-divine figure. Man is not a physical figure. Man is not a spiritual figure. He is not really physical. He's not spiritual. He is an act of self-awareness. And everything was created for this being, because this being is the only other being that has any kind of position outside of God, if you can call it that. He can make a mistake about who God is, but He is not outside of God. He's the only thing that has free will, that can decide if this mistake is real or the truth is real. And what is the truth? And then everything was created and it was executed. Everything is supervised by God Himself, now and forever. God is the only being who can create, bring something from nothing, and who can also is the only being that can do anything about anything. All actions come from God. None of actions are outside of God. And who is He doing this for? From a human being. So that person that you're always looking down on, that you think has no value, is really a quasi-divine figure. And that's what he is. Every human being that has a form of consciousness is the most superior human being. It's the most superior entity that has ever been made by God. And there are different levels of a human being. That's true. There are different contents and elements of consciousness. That's true. But the fundamental ability to act with consciousness is quasi-divine. And this applies to every human being that ever lived. And we have to understand this. And therefore we have to understand that we have to love every human being that exists and that ever existed. There is absolutely no exception to this rule. But every human being has to love God, and God loves every human being. There is no exception. The way we treat each other is terrible. We are completely devoid of this concept of the value of a person, what a person really is. That even the most significant person of all is greater than every entity in the universe, in the physical and in the spiritual universe. There is nothing higher than the human being because of sense of self-awareness. And this is an absolute truth. And it's only on the day that mankind realizes this, when he realizes who God is, how powerful God is, and that He creates everything and He does everything. There are no exceptions. And the greatest entity that He ever created was man, who knows himself, by himself, for himself. These are the two greatest entities of all, and both of these entities are subjects. But God is the subject that must exist, that He is the sounds of the letters, and the human being is simply a sequence of the letters. But both of these are related. And therefore the major commandment that comes from all of this is the concept of love. Because love is the cohesive glue that brings every man together because of what a person is. Every person must love another person because he not only has to love another person in terms of what he can do, he has to love him in terms of his value, what this person means to God. And this is true of every human who ever is created, from Adam down to all the ages to this generation. We have to love that which God loves, that which God Himself created, that which God created everything for. for this entity that is self-aware, and all he expects is that you have to recognize that he is the center of all existence and will always be the center of all existence. So I think we have to think about these thoughts, and we have to be aware of these thoughts, because that's really all man is, and that's what God expects. Okay. Thank you for listening. I was a little a slow start. I'm sorry about that, but that's fundamentally it.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question, Shimon?
Yeah, okay.
What is the chilik between, I know we have basically 613 ways of creating a will to decide between, yesh and ain. So that's where we have our free choice. So what happens when let's say I decide to play ping pong?
Yeah.
So where is that? Is God actually also behind that will? I think God's behind everything. Okay, but is that a bechira, or that's my question?
That's a very good question. And the answer to that question, the only purpose of man is to have a correct knowledge of who he is in relation to God. Right? That's what God wants. God wants him to know that the human is part of God. That's what he has, and he's making a mistake when he thinks he's outside of God. Right? And that only applies to the commandments that God gave you. So whether it's one commandment of Adam Rishon not to eat from the Eitz Das, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or whether it's the 7 commandments of the Noahide laws, or the 613 commandments that a Jew has to do, which is the commandments written in the Torah, this is the only way that a person can exhibit his choice. This is the only instance where man has free will. Anything which does not relate to a mitzvah, like, for example, you want to play ping pong. Now, where does that idea come from? It suddenly comes in your head. Well, it comes from God. And your ability to play ping pong comes from God. Everything that you have to do in relation to ping pong is from God. And in this action, if it's not related to a mitzvah, is not done by free will. So therefore, what you realize is that most of the actions in your life are not done by free will. Only those actions which relate to the 630 commandments. So these are not just simply actions. These are the only actions that are initiated by you. In other words, they are given to you to perform. You have to correct the one mistake that you make, that you're outside of God, independent of Him. And you have to do it in 613 different ways. Each mitzvah has to do with a specific way that you declare this. This is a declaration. The one thing that man can do in his self-awareness is to make a declaration that he is part of God and not outside of God and not independent. And that declaration is done in 613 different ways. How it's done, we really don't know. But it's manifest in these 613 ways. Every action which is outside of these 613 ways is not an action that has any free will at all. Nor can we even do those actions. The truth of the matter, even by doing a mitzvah, we don't do the action of a mitzvah. We are not responsible for the action of a single mitzvah. The only mitzvah that we really control is who we are and who God is. The knowledge that we are part of Him and depend on Him is the only real action that we can do, but we have 613 ways to manifest that. That's all it means. Nothing else that we do is free, and it all comes from God in its awareness, and it comes from God in its action. Nothing's outside of God this way. And this is the ultimate absolute truth.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. And before you got on the phone, I had one other question that is, make a long story short, quick answer. My question to you is, when Rachamim is ma'abed a madrega. Okay? When Rachamim is ma'abed a madrega, is that ibud gone forever? Meaning that if that aspect of existence has been, it's ma'abed by Rachamim, it's gone. There's no way of recapturing. That's my question. Okay.
No.
Okay.
No, that has to do with the nature of the Zulosai, the nature of the what God created. That a human being, Adam Arishan, was only one person, and Adam Arishan was supposed to go to Olam Haba by himself. Every human being that followed Adam comes from Adam. He's a fragmented form of consciousness that existed in totality in the first man that was ever created. Therefore, every human being can see God only in partial ways. He only has a partial view of the unity of God. Adam was the first man and the only man who can ever see the totality of God in terms of what God wants. When Adam sinned, he lost that, and the ability to see God by an entity in a certain totality in which he's capable of was rescinded. And the truth is, once that's rescinded and you are placed in a lower level, you remain on that level. So therefore, we are a consequence of our mitzvahs and our sins. We are the total consequence of what we do and what we choose. And once we lose a certain level of that insight, we have lost it forever. But we do have it on another level. And therefore, Olam Haba, the future world, exists on many levels. Each level is a way of seeing the unity of God. And on that level, that's the level that time does not exist. At that time, the future world is a level in which we will have a certain knowledge of God. And the knowledge that each person has of God is distinct from every other person. Because just like every person was once a part of Adam Arishan, every person has only a certain fraction of what Adam knew. And that fraction belongs to him and to no other person. But that's another shit that we have to make when we discuss humanity and the species of mankind. Okay. But fundamentally, that's what is at play. Okay. Thank you for listening.